Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where the government shutdown has now entered its fourth week, making it the second longest shutdown in U.S. history. The consequences for hundreds of thousands of workers, for vital government services, and for the American healthcare system are growing, and there are no signs it will end anytime soon. After nearly a dozen failed votes on funding in the Senate, Democrats are putting the onus on President Trump to kickstart negotiations, as the president says Democrats must end the shutdown first.
Donald Trump, instead of leaving the country, or before he leaves the country, should sit down and negotiate with us so we can address this horrible crisis. He should not be going away before he negotiates. The American people are in crisis.
I would love to meet. I would like to meet with both of them, but I set one little caveat. I will only meet if they let the country open.
To be clear, you won't meet with them until the government's open.
The government has to be open, yeah.
Today, more signals from both sides that they are not budging, with Democratic Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries slamming Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson for keeping the chamber out of session as Johnson doubles down.
Out of town and now are nowhere to be found. House Democrats understand our responsibility to run toward and embrace the American people as we defend their health care, their quality of life, and work hard to drive down the high cost of living in the United States of America.
Democrats are the ones who manufactured this entire situation without a single Republican vote, and now the chickens are coming back home to roost. They're trying to blame the other team. If you called each individual House Republican right now, we're almost 100%, probably 99%. Situation we're in.
So just to remind everyone, at the center of the shutdown, Democrats' demands on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies, which are set to expire at the end of the year. But with the ACA open enrollment set to begin in just 10 days, sticker shock for many Americans already setting in. According to the nonpartisan health policy research group KFF, the Kaiser Family Foundation, average premium payments will more than double next year without a tax credit extension. The impact will be felt all across America, but could hit Republican districts particularly hard, according to KFF, with more than half of those enrolled in the ACA living in GOP districts. Now, it comes as a group of 13 House Republicans in competitive districts are urging Speaker Johnson to promise action once the shutdown is over, writing, quote, allowing these tax credits to lapse without a clear path forward would risk real harm to those we represent. Our conference and President Trump have been clear that we will not take health care away from families who depend on it. This is our opportunity to demonstrate that commitment through action. Joining me now to start us all off is White House correspondent Monica Alba, and with me on set, Capitol Hill correspondent Mel Zanona and senior national security correspondent Courtney Cuby. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. So, Monica, I want to start with you. We did hear President Trump say that, yes, he would meet with Democrats, but only after they vote to reopen the government. Is the White House starting to feel any of these pressure points, though, Monica? Public polling, a majority of people still blame Republicans, and also, of course, missed paychecks. We're starting to see challenges at airports across the country. Is any of this having an impact?
Not from my conversations, Kristen. I have to tell you, the White House, the president, top aides, they are very united in their position, and they are as dug in as can possibly be. They do believe that so far their position has been clear, has been consistent, which is that they made their pitch to Democrats, which was to try to support this stopgap measure, to try to basically get a CR, a continuing resolution, to then have the ability to reopen the government. And then the White House says they would be open to sitting down and having a conversation about those health care subsidy expiring concerns, about potentially these other issues, and that's when the president says he's willing to sit down with Democratic leadership. Now, of course, what's interesting there is that over the last 22 days or so, the president has very much made an effort to completely place the blame on Democrats. And now the language is, we just want them to reopen the government and then we're happy to sit down and talk. But they feel so far that it will be Democrats who blink first in all of this because of the pain points that you raise. They believe that people will ultimately blame Democrats for that because, as we saw yesterday with the president and those Republican senators in the Rose Garden, they feel that their public messaging has worked, which is Republicans keep trying to hold these votes to reopen the government and that it's not enough Democrats who are joining them to make that happen. So simply from a messaging standpoint, from an optics standpoint, the president feels pretty pleased with the way they have played this, and they say that their position doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon.
Yeah, it does seem as though both sides are increasingly dug in. Monica, let me ask you, because, of course, we know that President Trump is set to visit Asia in the next several days. Any signs that he could actually change those plans if Congress does get closer to a deal?
Not as of now, Kristen, and we have also been putting this in the category of business is pretty much as usual as it has been, even if we weren't in a government shutdown at the White House, with plenty of travel. He has been traveling domestically. He, of course, went to the Middle East in the last couple of weeks to oversee phase 1 of that critical ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas. And as you point out, he will be on a multi-day trip. This will be a long trip to various countries in Asia where he will participate in world summits and where we expect he will sit down with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And for now, that trip is full steam ahead, and the president plans on carrying that out, all while the government will stay shut down.
All right, covering a lot of angles there. Monica Alba at the White House, thank you so much. Let me turn to Mel and Courtney on set here. So, Mel, give us the view from Capitol Hill, because we know that there has been some discussion among some Republicans about potentially trying to find the contours of a deal on health care subsidies. Where do things stand on the Hill?
Well, there is no movement right now, but I will say that Republicans are starting to feel the heat on these Affordable Care Act subsidies. And the reason is because those notices have started to either go out or been posted online, letting people know that their premiums are about to skyrocket. And what's really interesting about this debate, Kristen, you and I have talked about this, so many Republican districts and states actually use the Affordable Care Act exchanges to get their health care, especially in the South, places like Georgia, Florida, Texas. I was talking to one congresswoman today, Maria Elvira Salazar of Florida. She has the highest number of ACA enrollees in the entire country. She's calling on her party to extend those Affordable Care Act subsidies, said it is imperative. But right now, she's standing behind the party leadership strategy, which is we're not going to negotiate on this until Democrats reopen the government. We'll see if that starts to change, especially as we get closer to that November 1st open enrollment date. But certainly Republicans recognize this is an issue for them as well.
It's so fascinating because Speaker Johnson has kept the House out, and that sort of added extra pressure to him with calls for him to bring the House back, saying you're not even here working.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They've been out of session for over a month now. Just remarkable. And in that time, they could have been doing so many other things, hearings, committee markups, long-term appropriations bills, and yes, something on the Affordable Care Act. I don't think this is a sustainable position for Johnson much longer. They're eventually going to have to redo the stopgap spending bill because it has a November 21st end date. Obviously, that's going to become inoperable the closer we get to that date. So we'll see how long they can actually keep them away.
Court, give us the view from the Pentagon, because obviously this has the ability to impact service members' pay. We know that they did move some money around so that they wouldn't skip their first paycheck, but can the administration continue to do that?
So basically what they did was, at the president's direction, they took $8 billion worth of unobligated funds that were already supposed to be going towards research and development. They pushed it into a different account. They were able to pay all U.S. troops. That means active duty men and women in the military, plus the National Guard, who have been federalized. We've been talking a lot about them. They're frankly in cities all over the country at this point. They all got paid about October 15th. That $8 billion pretty much was all eaten up with that one pay period, though. So in order for troops to get their next pay, which is Halloween, October 31st, just about less than 10 days away from now, there needs to be another movement of money, or there has to be some sort of congressional authorization here. At this point, there's nothing moving in that direction. Mel would probably know that way better than I am. By the way, it's so fun to be on set. We never get to be on set together. But, you know, at this point, there's no movement towards that. So at this point, U.S. troops will not get paid on Halloween.
Well, Court tees up my question to you perfectly. Is there any movement on that on Capitol Hill? Any discussion about getting payment to U.S. service members?
Well, there's actually is going to be a bill on the floor tomorrow that would pay not only the military, but all federal workers who are forced to work during the shutdown. However, we're not expecting that to pass. Democrats have already previewed two reasons why they're going to vote against it. One, they said it doesn't cover civil servants. And number two, they're worried it gives too much authority to President Trump and his OMB director to sort of pick and choose who gets paid, who doesn't get paid. But for Republicans, this is just another way to try to wear Democrats down, make them take really tough votes. You can imagine some of the campaign attack ads that write themselves against Democrats, but so far they're holding firm.
Well, Mel, one of the pressure points in 2019 during the shutdown, of course, was TSA officials, staff shortages at airports. airport and airline delays. We're starting to see a little bit of that right now. Could that actually be the straw that breaks the camel's back in this instance, or what do you think?
I do think ultimately what breaks the camel's back is an outpouring of pressure from constituents, perhaps because of travel. Also, don't forget these lawmakers travel too. They don't want to be waiting in airports any more than we do. Everyone's really looking to Thanksgiving. I know that seems a very far way away. Hopefully we're not in a shutdown still then, but that could be a pressure point when there's already a surge in travel. There's long lines at the airports, delays, potentially that could be something that breaks the camel's back. But the hope on Capitol Hill is that they resolve this far before then.
Courtney, I have to turn to you on a different matter because we're learning that the Pentagon is cracking down on information that Congress can access. Of course, this comes on the heels of the Pentagon effectively making it impossible for reporters to cover the Pentagon. So what is this latest move about?
Yeah, this is just another one in what's been just this string of crackdown on anything that Secretary Pete Hegseth thinks could be a leak or could lead to a leak of information. And just for perspective here, he sees anything that is not an authorized disclosure by him or a statement or a press release as a leak, no matter the level of classification, unclassified, no matter what it is. So there has been he and senior staff around him have been concerned that some of the information that's getting out publicly is coming from the Hill, is coming from Congress. So he has now effectively prohibited anyone in the Pentagon, except for members of the Inspector General, many of whom right now are furloughed, by the way. But he has prohibited them from any kind of official or unofficial discussions with the Hill. That includes everyone from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the people whose job it is to interact with congressional officials. They work in legislative affairs without prior authorization from the Office of Legislative Affairs. This is going to have a crazy effect when you think about the number of people in the Pentagon who might just call someone on the Hill, you know, for basic conversations about something that's going on, to get a sense, to get a vibe. The notion that this actually gets enacted, it would have a huge impact on how the Pentagon's relationship with the Hill, which candidly at this point, the DOD relationship with the Hill is not in a great place anyway.
Well, I know you're not in the building, but we know you will stay on top of every twist and turn. Courtney and Mel, thank you both so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Well, joining me now is the administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Dr. Mehmet Oz. Dr. Oz, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Honored to be with you, Kristen. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, Dr. Oz. I want to start off by asking you about open enrollment for the Obamacare marketplace, these subsidies. Open enrollment, of course, begins November 1st. It's already underway for Medicare recipients. I want to ask you, if the ACA subsidies expire, premiums for everyone could more than double. Do you believe those subsidies should be extended?
You know, the reality is the ACA has been sick from the moment it was created, and it got a lot sicker during COVID. There were changes made, like these enhanced subsidies you're asking about. They were added on top of the already robust subsidies that exist. Probably 92% of the money that's spent on insurance premiums are part of the original ACA, and that wasn't even enough, apparently, because they added more money during COVID. So the question really isn't, should we put more money into it, or how much more, or continue these COVID-era subsidies? Is how do we actually restructure the system, Kristen, so it works? And to do that, you need smart people like the kinds of folks we have in this beautiful building I'm speaking to you from, which houses HHS and the agency I run, Medicare and Medicaid. But they're not here now. They're furloughed. They're at home. So all the actuarials, the insurance experts, all the folks who have spent their whole life studying how to provide better quality insurance to folks from the bottom end of the income spectrum, those making, 100 to 400% of the poverty level, those folks aren't here. And my first time through government is, I was sitting where you were for most of my adult life, trying to actually be in the private sector. But I never really thought that the shutdown would last this long. I always assumed that the Democrats had made their point. They were upset about the one big beautiful bill. ACA came into the conversation as well, and they would sort of get everyone back to work so they come up with some serious answers. But it takes time to come up with major policy steps. But can I add one thing, Kristen, because you asked the question?
Yeah, please.
The issues here, I mean, we're obviously an open enrollment for Medicare, and just for everybody out there, for the seniors, don't be alarmed. Medicare itself, everyone loves it. Democrats, Republicans, no one's touching Medicare. So Medicare.gov is open, and if you need to go through open enrollment and take an extra fresh look, please do that. But the accusation that the one big beautiful bill also needed to be repealed sort of it surprises me, because we know that it cut out a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse, and especially when it gets to specific issues like claims that there are no illegal immigrants getting money through the system. So why would you bother picking on that? We went back and checked, Kristen, which is my job. I had investigators actually look at the numbers, and just this week we learned that there's more than $1 billion spent on illegal immigrants just over the past few months in just half a dozen states on illegal immigrant health care, which means if you live in Texas, your federal taxes are being used to pay for illegal immigrants in California. And that's not how the system should work. So parts of the puzzle don't make sense to me.
Dr. Oz, a couple of follow-up questions for you. First of all, we should note undocumented immigrants are ineligible for federal health care programs. But let me just ask you, you cite this new study. Are you going to release the findings? We have not seen this actual investigation and the results that you're citing. Do you commit to making them public?
I do, Kristen. I commit to you right here and now we'll make that data public. The reason it's not public now is it's so new. We began collecting data from the first 2 or 3 states 6 months ago. We got another 3 or 4 states on. We're going to look at a total of 8 states which have state-based mechanisms of paying for illegal immigrants. As to your point, by the way, and you're right, federal money is not supposed to go towards illegal immigrants. However, when states have a desire that they make on their own to fund the illegal immigrants, they often commingle those monies, and that's the money we're talking about now. They may not have done it on purpose, but you should know, Kristen, they're already returning hundreds of millions of dollars. So you don't return money that you don't think you owe.
All right, Doctor, I was just getting back to my original question, though, about these subsidies, and we'll debate health care in just a moment, but do you think they should be extended so that millions of Americans don't lose their health care coverage?
I wouldn't extend the subsidies the way they were created for COVID. Remember, we were at war with a virus. And during wartime, you take extreme steps to try to make sure everyone's protected. And, I think at the time when this decision was made, fine, everyone acknowledged that eventually we'd be past the COVID era, which we are now. We're no longer at war. And so we don't want to use the exact same tactics that we used to deal with a virus when we're out of that period. If we want to have a serious improvement of the ACA, which, I think, again, because it provides insurance to those folks just getting off Medicaid before they enter commercial insurance, then we ought to address it more robustly. I'll give you a concrete example, Kristen. When the original models were created for the ACA, it was always believed that half of the people in the exchange would come out of the private sector and be funded from the private sector. The other half would come with government subsidies. It's 95% government subsidized because so much of the subsidy goes into the insurance companies that they don't need to compete on price.
But Dr. Oz, I hear you saying that you think Obamacare is deeply flawed. So let me ask you, Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. You've had control for 9 months now. If Obamacare is so bad, why hasn't the president introduced an alternative plan yet? He's had 9 months.
Well, there were ideas introduced to address some of the shortcomings of the ACA, but it could not get through the reconciliation process. It was pulled out for a variety of different reasons, and so it never made it to the final law. And the legislation that currently exists does an excellent job dealing with the shortcomings that we felt were important with the Medicaid systems. And it was always envisioned that Congress would, eventually get around to dealing with some of the issues that you're raising now around the ACA. But when you're in a shutdown, you prevent that from actually happening, because the people who give technical expertise to the congressmen and senators who've got to actually write the laws, they're not at work anymore.
Yeah, but Dr. Oz, Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene has sharply criticized Republicans, saying that there is no health care plan. She says that it's time to get one. Do you acknowledge that President Trump does not have a comprehensive health care plan with which to replace Obamacare?
I fully believe the president has a plan. We've been talking about it quite a bit. There's all kinds of ideas. Yes, the issue, Kristen, is which specific parts of the plan do you prioritize? Which are the ones you want to focus on? So as an example, just to talk about Medicaid, because we already did it, what was done with the One Big Beautiful Bill was perhaps the most ambitious reform of our Medicaid system ever. It was a massive effort to realign the president and the leaders of states, governors, so that what the federal government wants to do and what the state state government wants to do for our most vulnerable citizens are done in coordination. The president did that with a great passion. He led the way. I spoke to him frequently during that process. We also took out a lot of the fraud and waste and abuse, so it was hurting the system. Kristen, we would have spent $5.4 trillion more on Medicaid if we hadn't addressed that. That would have basically made us a big healthcare system with a small country attached.
But Dr. Oz, you're saying President Trump has a plan. If he has a plan, why hasn't he put it forward yet? Why don't the American people know about it yet?
The plans that were originally offered during the One Big Beautiful Bill negotiations fell out, which is fine. But when you hold the entire country hostage by shutting the government down, which is what the Democrats have done, you don't allow any discussion. There's not going to be any coordinated effort. You're not going to get one party to compromise with the other party when you're literally holding the entire government hostage. And the folks who would help this system evolve into a mature model aren't at work to help do it. I think we should reopen the government. We should use a clean CR, continuing resolution, to do just that. It needs to be long enough to give everyone time to both evaluate and come up with other ideas. But in the meantime, let people go back to work. You know, free the federal employees to go help the system and do their job.
All right. And just to button it up, so far, the president has not officially put a bill on the floor. I do want to ask you, though, the president has talked about lowering drug prices, pharmaceutical prices, and he's repeatedly claimed that he could cut those prices by more than 100%. Dr. Oz, take a listen.
You know, we've cut drug prices by 1,200, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500%. I don't mean 50%. I mean 14, 1,500%, because we're going favored nations. We have something coming up, favored nations, where I'm going to be reducing drug prices by 14, 1,500%. Drug prices are coming down 400%, 200%, 600%, numbers that nobody's ever seen before.
Dr. Oz, cutting drug prices by 400%, anything over 100%, wouldn't that effectively make them free? Is that a realistic goal from the president?
The president does the calculation by saying, okay, if a drug was $100 and you reduce it to $50, it's 100% cheaper because you're taking $50 off and leaving it with only $50. So the amount you took off the price is equal to the amount that's left. They're equal, so it's 100%. But
he said 1,500%. In one of those, he said 1,500%.
Well, if you take a drug that is $200 or $240, like we did last week, and you reduce it to $10, those are the numbers you're talking about. That stated, the bigger question we should be asking ourselves is, why didn't we do this earlier? Kristen, you and I have known each other for a long time. This has not been a secret that we pay 3 times more for the exact same pill made in the same factory, even if it's made in America, than that same product sells for overseas. And when the president learned about this a while back, he got upset and he started making a big deal about it, both in the first term and this time around. He said, I'm not going to be stopped. I'm going to make sure everyone understands that it is not America's responsibility to carry the entire burden for innovating solutions to America's health crises. The entire world benefits from those crises. And so, as you know, we have achieved great success by dropping the drugs that are sold by a leading U.S. company, Pfizer, a leading European company, AstraZeneca. Last week, we reduced prices for fertility drugs by literally $242 to $10.
Dr. Oz, none of that's binding, though. Does that need to be codified by Congress? Does that need to be put into law by Congress? Those lower prices by Pfizer?
Kristen, we have contracts, signed contracts from the manufacturers, as Secretary of Commerce Lutnick and Secretary of Health and Human Services Kennedy. These are signed documents. They hold water. And we have many other deals in the pipeline, same construct. We are pledging not to tariff these endeavors if these companies bring onshore their drug manufacturing, so bring their work to America so American workers get jobs and revenue from those facilities flow to the American tax base. We're going to make sure that all Medicaid patients get most favored nation drug pricing, so governors don't have as much of a burden to pay for. We're going to make sure that all new products released in this country are at that most favored nation pricing, and we're getting better pricing even for Medicare drugs. So across the board, we're delivering on something that no one thought was even possible, because the president knows how to negotiate. The first step in negotiating is to ask. Dr.
Oz, thank you so much. I have many more questions, but we're going to have you back, and I'll ask you all of them. Thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Take care, Kristen.
You take care as well. Thank you so much. Coming up, the view from a top House Democrat on shutdown and the consequences for the military, federal workers, and Americans all across the country. Congressman Adam Smith, ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee, is standing by. Plus, as we mentioned, President Trump meeting with the head of NATO in the Oval Office this hour with the future of the war in Ukraine and Kyiv's request for more military aid on the line. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. This hour, President Trump is set to host the NATO Secretary General at the White House. It comes after some tumultuous diplomatic efforts by the Trump administration to try to end the war in Ukraine, starting with the president's meeting with Ukraine's President Zelensky on Friday, during which the president would not sign off on the sale of U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine. And yesterday, President Trump called off his meeting with Russian President Putin in Budapest. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman from Washington, Adam Smith. He's also the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good to see you. Thank you.
It's good to see you as well. Look, you have been quite critical of President Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin. I wonder what your reaction was when you saw that President Trump did, in fact, call that summit off in Budapest.
I think that's a positive. And we've seen quite a few positive signs since the summit in Alaska that the president at least has stopped directly blaming Ukraine for the war. He has rhetorically placed the blame where it belongs on Putin and Russia. What we need now is we need the president to put some actual pressure on Putin, whether that's the sale of more weapons to Ukraine or sanctions or something that makes it clear to Putin that his continuing this war is going to come with a cost. That's what's going to force him to the table. Look, Ukraine has done an incredible job of fighting back against Russia. They fought Russia to a standstill. Putin is in a very weakened position. We just need to make sure we keep pushing that position, adding strength to what Ukraine is doing to force Putin to the bargaining table. We can't be rolling out the red carpet for Putin and doing a lot of the stuff that Trump did in Alaska. We got to put pressure on Putin, not give him space. And that's what I hope the president will do going forward.
So you talk about pressure. Secretary Bessent just said this outside of the White House. He said, quote, "We are going to either announce after the close this afternoon or first thing tomorrow morning a substantial pickup in Russian sanctions." Your reaction to that, Congressman?
I think that's great. I think that's what needs to happen. And keep in mind, that's what needs to happen to end this war and to get to peace. That's what we all want. We don't want this war to continue. Certainly, Ukraine doesn't want this war to continue. But Putin was going to keep pushing it in the hopes that eventually he could take over all of Ukraine. We have to make it clear to him that our support for Ukraine will not wane and that our alliance is going to stay strong, to make it clear that he can't win. That's what forces him to the table. So I think that would be a very, very welcome development.
Congressman Smith, I had the opportunity to talk to President Zelensky after he had wrapped up his meeting here in Washington at the White House with President Trump, where he said President Trump didn't say yes to Tomahawk missiles, but didn't say no. I want to play you a little bit of that interview and get your reaction on the other side. Take a look.
Very sensitive for Russians. They afraid that United States can deliver Ukraine. I think that Putin afraid that United States will deliver us Tomahawks. And I think that he really afraid that we will use, and he knows what military goals, we know where they are, where the military goals of Russia, and he afraid that we can use it.
Do you believe the U.S. should go so far as providing Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, something that Russia has said it will see as an escalation?
Yes. I mean, keep in mind, Putin has said every single thing we've done since he invaded in February of 22 was an escalation. He uses those threats to try to block the support for Ukraine. But yes, we should help Ukraine defend itself. We should not get into a direct conflict with Russia, and we haven't. But Russia invaded a sovereign country illegally and brutally. We should support Ukraine and continue to support them strong enough so that Russia can be stopped.
I do want to ask you about Venezuela. We have seen these strikes in the Caribbean by the Trump administration of suspected drug trafficking boats. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth announcing today yet another strike on what the administration is calling narco terrorists. This time it was in the Eastern Pacific. You have called for a hearing on these strikes. Do you believe you have bipartisan support for that, Congressman? And do you think that you're going to get your hearing?
I do. I think there's bipartisan support for greater transparency from this administration. You know, we're trying to push for the hearing. Congress has to come back into session for that hearing to happen. Speaker Johnson should stop shutting down the Congress and refusing to negotiate and actually engage. But yeah, I think there are a lot of Republicans who are concerned about this. There has been no transparency whatsoever on exactly who we are hitting and why and what the long-term strategy is. We've heard, well, we're very concerned about the spread of drugs in the U.S. And yes, we are all concerned about that. But using the U.S. military for lethal force is a huge, huge escalation and a huge step. And also we've heard, well, we're concerned about fentanyl, but there's no fentanyl coming out of Venezuela. We've then also heard from the president and others, you know, words that make it sound like they want regime change in Venezuela and also to put pressure on Colombia. I mean, so what is it? Why exactly are we using lethal force in an unprecedented way? There has been insufficient transparency and explanation. We don't even know exactly who is being hit. We've heard that there are 24 drug organizations that are on the list of targets, but who are those 24 exactly? And why have we been targeting these particular people? That lack of transparency, I think, is a violation of the Constitution, and Congress needs to exercise our constitutional obligation to have oversight over the Department of Defense, and certainly oversight over the president basically starting a war with maybe Venezuela, maybe 24 different narcotic organizations, drug dealer organizations. We just don't know what's happening, and the lack of transparency from the Pentagon and the White House is very, very problematic.
I do want to ask you, Congressman, about the government shutdown. We are officially entering the 4th week of the shutdown. Federal workers set to miss yet another paycheck. Senator Thune is setting up a vote tomorrow on a bill that would pay those essential federal employees currently working without pay. Would you urge your Democratic colleagues to vote for that bill, and do you plan to vote for that bill?
Yeah, I support that bill, yes. But look, I listened to your interview with Dr. Oz, and by the way, why can't he just say, yeah, the president's wrong, you can't reduce prices by 1,400%? It's not actually possible. I wish somebody in the administration would feel comfortable enough to say, no, that's wrong. Just because Trump says it doesn't mean we got to twist all the basic facts of how the world works to try to make it look like he didn't say something stupid. But that's a minor little point. On the shutdown, it makes no sense that Dr. Oz is saying, well, we can't negotiate with you in this setting. I've been through a number of different shutdowns. Every single one of them has had strong opinions on both sides. Every single one has had Congress in session negotiating. It is precisely the most important moment for Congress to be in session when we have such a significant disagreement. The shutdown has a profoundly negative impact, but it is the Republicans' flat refusal to negotiate, their insistence that Democrats just have to vote for their budget. And that's what this is. Okay, you can call it a CR, but it is an extension of the budget past October 1st. It is an extension of Trump's budget. And we are troubled by that. If you want our votes, you should negotiate with us. And also, November 1st was a really important date. They wanted to do a CR until the 21st of November, past the point at which healthcare premiums were going to go through the ceiling. The reason we didn't vote for this was because there was an urgency to deal with this before November 1st, certainly before November 21st. And the Republicans' refusal to do that is why we didn't vote for it. We're talking about millions of people losing health insurance and millions of more having their costs go through the ceiling. And the Republican response is shut down the House, refuse to negotiate. That's not the way that this is supposed to work.
Very quickly, a new poll by the AP found that Americans think everyone, including Democrats, bears some responsibility for this shutdown. There you see it, 58% to 58%. Do you believe that you and other Democrats are starting to feel the pressure of that and the political price that could be paid?
I think there's pressure on all of us. And look, yes, of course, we all bear some responsibility for it. But the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? I mean, what Democrats are trying to accomplish is we're trying to save millions of Americans' health insurance. We're trying to save millions more from having their health insurance premiums skyrocket in cost. That's what we're fighting for. What are the Republicans fighting for exactly? To allow that to happen? I mean, that's the message I think we need to deliver to the American people. But look, it is not our intention to basically have the government shut down. We want to focus on health care. And the other thing we want to focus on is the president, spending money outside of the law. You know, how can we agree to an appropriations bill when the president says, okay, I'm going to fund Republicans, but not Democrats? I mean, these are issues that really matter and ought to be fought over. And again, it's just unacceptable that the Republicans have refused to have the House in session or even negotiate over these points. I mean, clearly they don't care about issues that matter a great deal to the American people.
All right. Congressman Adam Smith, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up next, federal immigration operations ramp up in New York City and Los Angeles as NBC News has exclusive new reporting that we will break here on how the rush to beef up ICE has led to some concerning recruitment practices. That story is next. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back now to an NBC News exclusive and new questions about who will be carrying out the Trump administration's immigration crackdown. One current and two former Homeland Security officials tell NBC News that some new ICE recruits have showed up to training without being fully vetted. The officials telling NBC News the recruits were placed in ICE's training program before the agency determined that they had either failed drug tests, had disqualifying criminal backgrounds, or had not met the physical or academic requirements to serve. Now, it comes as the agency rushes to hire officers to carry out President Trump's mass deportation policy. NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley helped break that story. She joins me now. Congratulations on this scoop, Julia. Thank you for breaking it here. So just how many ICE agents are we talking about who could fit into this unqualified category?
Well, according to some data that was compiled very recently internally at ICE, there were over 200 new recruits who showed up for training. That's supposed to be after they've gone through a security vetting, fingerprints, drug test, attested that they can do the physical portion of the training. They've showed up and they haven't been able to meet those requirements. In some cases, I'm told they show up and they volunteer the fact that, no, I never did submit fingerprints, or no, I never did do a drug test. And so trainers are having to pull people off the base there in Georgia and take them out to go get these things done. So the real concern is who might not be admitting that and who might be slipping through the cracks.
So, Julia, why is this happening? Is it because there's a rush to get people through? Is it because they're not being careful enough? What's the best explanation?
When I talked to former officials who know the way this process used to work in the past, they said it was pretty slow going and really used to drive a lot of people crazy because it could take up to a year before they were fully vetted and put out into training and then out into the field. Now it can be as short as 2 weeks. Sometimes it's not exactly clear what needs to happen, but they report to a field office, and if they have no prior law enforcement experience, they're sent to this training. But before they even go to that field office, they're supposed to come in with HR having checked all these boxes. In a lot of cases, that's just not happening. Part of it is, I've told the HR office just hasn't gotten the resources that they need to be able to match this huge demand to hire 10,000 new officers by the end of the year. And I'm told, Kristen, they're less than halfway to fulfilling that goal.
Wow. Well, I know you'll continue to stay on top of that. In the meantime, we saw these ICE operations ramp up in New York and Los Angeles. What are you watching there?
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, we want more details, especially in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
There's a man named Richard L.A. on TikTok who has been following ICE officers and their movements around Los Angeles, and he was actually targeted by immigration officers and U.S. Marshals just yesterday in Los Angeles. They boxed in his car, and we understand he started ramming the other vehicles. Then an ICE agent fired a gun. It's not clear if that was a mistake or what was the reason for the gun firing. That's the key piece here. But we understand that this man was shot in the elbow. He remains in the hospital in serious condition, and that a bullet ricocheted, hit the hand of a U.S. Marshal, and that he definitely went to the hospital as well, but he is in stable condition.
Wow. Okay. Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for all of your great reporting. As
Thanks,
always,
Kristen.
really appreciate it. Coming up after the break, new polling data shows most Americans view President Trump as a, quote, dangerous dictator rather than a strong leader. We'll dig into the politics of that and the implications. The panel's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. A majority of Americans disapprove of the job President Trump is doing. That's according to a sweeping new poll. The president's job approval now at 42%, according to the PRRI American Values Survey. But the survey is also sounding an alarm about the president's tactics as much as his performance. 56% of people surveyed say they see him as a, quote, dangerous dictator, while 41% say they see him as a, quote, strong leader. I'm joined now by my panel, Nicholas Wu, congressional reporter for Politico, Amisha Cross, former Obama campaign advisor and now Democratic strategist, and Mike Dubke, who served as White House communications director during the first Trump administration. Thanks to all of you for being here. I'm going to start with you, Mike. What do you make of this poll? You don't put too much stock in it.
No, I do put stock. I mean, look, the overall thing on the poll is we have a partisan divide in this country. So there's not a lot of new information coming out. I did dive into the numbers a little bit. I didn't like the way that they set off the Democrat, Republican, and independents. They need more independents in this poll. That's one thing. These questions I don't like, though, because they asked, is he a dictator with too much power, or is he a strong leader who deserves more power? And when you mix questions like that, you get the headline of the dictator. But I think really what people are reacting to is whether or not he's exercising. The real question should be, is he exercising too much power, or does the executive need more power? And I think that's an interesting question, but they trip me up, at least, with this dictator versus strong leader language.
Yeah, the argument that the words matter so much in these polls. Amisha, what do you make of Mike's argument? And what are the implications for Democrats? Because in 2024, Democrats spent a lot of time trying to cast Trump as someone who would not adhere to the limits of executive authority. That strategy clearly didn't work in 2024. But does this suggest that perhaps those types of arguments could resonate?
Absolutely, because Trump made a promise, and it's a promise made and a promise kept. Donald Trump said that he would be a dictator on day one. We've seen how many days now that he has exercised that dictatorial power. Project 2025 outlines something that we call the unitary executive, essentially usurping power and putting it all in the power of the presidency. We've seen in city after city, be it whether it's in a blue state or a red state or a purple state, we just saw those No Kings rallies, and those just keep getting bigger and bigger. They aren't organized overnight. People are recognizing what this president is doing and the overreach asserted with it. And I think that, to the point of that question, I do think the double question is a bit of a conundrum. But more importantly, it's a whole lot easier to point to dictatorship when you see it in action than it is before it gets there. And I think that that was the issue that Democrats had in trying to issue a warning without there actually being the presence of that dictatorial power.
Nicholas, either way, what do you think the message is for Congress? Does this raise questions about whether Congress is exerting its authority?
I think we're now going into the fourth week of the government shutdown, and what this polling is showing us is that, if anything, both sides are more likely to dig in on their own positions. Democrats are pointing to polls like this as evidence of why they need to keep on voting down government funding bills and to continue their fight, since on top of what they've been talking about with health care, trying to rein in executive authority has been a big part of their message. Now, whether or not that will be successful in the end, we'll see.
Well, you take me to my next question. I did have an opportunity to interview Dr. Oz, of course, the CMS administrator, and he talked about the fact that he thinks the crux of this, of course, is about extending Obamacare subsidies. His argument is he thinks Obamacare is broken. So I pressed him on whether Republicans have a replacement. Let's take a look at that exchange. And do you acknowledge that President Trump does not have a comprehensive health care plan with which to replace Obamacare?
I fully believe the president has a plan. We've been talking about it quite a bit. There's all kinds of ideas. Yes, the issue, Kristen, is which specific parts of the plan do you prioritize? Which are the ones you want to focus on? So as an example, just to talk about Medicaid, because we already did it, what was done with the One Big Beautiful Bill was perhaps the most ambitious reform of our Medicaid system ever. It was a massive effort to realign the president and the leaders of states, governors, so that what the federal government wants to do and what the state government wants to do for our most vulnerable citizens are done in coordination.
So, Nicholas, you talk about both sides being dug in. That was certainly on display, but not a lot of clarity about where the Republican health care bill might be.
I think that's in part by design. Talking about health care, talking about changing Obamacare, the ACA at all, is really not terrain that a lot of Republicans want to be fighting on. If past is precedent, the last time Republicans tried to repeal Obamacare during the first Trump term, it led to massive losses for them in the midterms in 2018. And that is something that a lot of purple district Republicans are very cognizant of this time around.
What about that, Mike? And is health care a bit of a vulnerability for Republicans, particularly in the midst of this fight?
As somebody who was there and has battle scars from repeal and replace, I want to say you are spot on and exactly right. However, in this particular instance, I think we can look. If Dr. Oz had stuck to Obamacare is broken, and you just have to look at the fact that we have to have subsidies to keep it alive and keep it affordable for people, shows that Obamacare is broken, and we should be talking about that. I think Republicans are on stronger ground talking about the reforming, but I don't know that they are on strong ground proposing an entirely new health care system.
Amisha, where do you think Democrats go from here? Because, boy, they seem very dug in and saying we are not going to vote to reopen the government until we negotiate on this. But now we are starting to see polls that show Americans increasingly pointing the finger at both parties.
Well, I think that Democrats have to hold the line and honestly believe that they probably should have during the first round of an iteration of a government shutdown where, Schumer decided that he was going to go in a different direction. For Democrats, this is paying attention to what's happening on the ground, specifically around health care, because we know that those subsidies are going to run out. We know that individuals who are Medicaid recipients are largely, in terms of percentages, are largely in red states, many of them in the exact same states that carried Trump by double digits. So it matters for them to recognize, hey, not only does he not have a plan, and this repeal and replace thing didn't just start with him. We know that administrations ago, they didn't have a plan to do it either. It is also one in which they've had years to develop a plan. We don't need concepts of a plan. People need health care. So they have to figure it out.
Mike, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to, this is where I'm pushing back on it in the sense that I don't think there's a repeal and replace. That it died in 2017 when it wasn't successful, when they were on the 5-yard line, spiked the ball in the Rose Garden and it didn't work. That's dead. But reforming Obamacare can happen, and they can have that conversation, again, if we open up government, and open up the federal government. And I think this is where Republicans and Democrats really do need to come together. And I am curious how long the Democrats are going to hold out, because Republicans are going to hold out as long as they need to. But they are saying we're going to talk about it. Democrats have to come back to the table.
Reform and cutting access are two very different things. What we're seeing from Republicans is a Republican Party that is very willing to let people die, to let rural hospitals close, to kick people off of the rolls for much-needed health care. That is not a reform.
In the Working Families Act, One Big Beautiful Bill, whatever we're calling it today, there was subsidies for rural hospitals. Now, so that I just don't think carries water, that argument.
Nicholas, how does this all end when you, as we see, both sides are very dug in. This is what we hear from lawmakers. It's emblematic of, frankly, the fact that lawmakers are saying we're not coming to the negotiating table because they're both dug in on their positions.
That's part of the problem. Even lawmakers I've talked to have no idea how this ends. Part of the issue is that the administration has taken away some of the pain points that might otherwise have forced an end to the shutdown. There was this issue of whether the troops would get paid. The Trump administration found money under the couch cushions to pay the troops. And so at least for now, that's, not something that would force everyone to the table.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Great conversation. Nicholas, Amisha, and Mike. Appreciate it. Well, we are following breaking news now out of the White House announcing new sanctions on Russia, those sanctions targeting Russia's two largest oil companies. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez joins me now. Gabe, this had been a step that the president had been pressed on for months. Would they announce more sanctions here today in the wake of canceling what he had planned to be a trip to meet Vladimir Putin in Budapest? Here, the administration is announcing more sanctions.
Yeah, that's right, Kristen. And look, a senior White House official telling me a short time ago that the president governs by instinct and he felt the time was right to impose these sanctions. The official also telling me that this was related to the meeting between Vladimir Putin and President Trump falling through. Essentially, the president growing increasingly frustrated that both sides have not been able to agree to a ceasefire. But as you said, those sanctions just being announced within the past few minutes by the Treasury Department against Russia's two largest largest oil companies and dozens of subsidiaries as well. So certainly this is something that Ukraine had called for, but Ukraine had wanted the United States to go further and approve and provide those long-range Tomahawk missiles, which President Trump has not yet done. But it does appear, again, just this afternoon, we got wind of it earlier this afternoon from the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who indicated that these sanctions were coming. And again, just a few moments ago, Kristen, the U.S. slapping new sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, Kristen.
So talk about the significance, Gabe. Is this a shift in strategy? And it comes as President Trump is meeting with the
Yeah, look, the president, just a few days ago, the president had indicated that he seemed optimistic that just within the next few weeks, he would meet with Vladimir Putin in Hungary. Certainly that has fallen through just within the last few days. This week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who, by the way, was at the White House today, he had a phone call with the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, where it became clear to the administration that Russia was not interested in peace at this point, and the president did not feel that a face-to-face meeting with Putin point would be productive. So certainly, you know as well as anyone, Kristen, that for quite some time now, President Trump has been reluctant to impose these any further sanctions on Russia. Critics of the administration have accused the president of, going by while Vladimir Putin kicked the can down the road, so to speak. So this does seem like an escalation in terms of economic sanctions. But again, Ukraine has also called for more weapons support from the United States. The senior White House official I spoke with did say that the president not ruling out a meeting with Putin. In fact, he would like to have one at some point. Just at this point, the time is not right, and that is why the president decided to go ahead with these sanctions today.
Gabe, let me follow up with you, if I could, on the weapons piece of this. I had the opportunity to interview President Zelensky on Friday after he'd had that meeting with President Trump. He believes that the U.S. giving Ukraine those Tomahawk long-range missiles that can strike deep inside Russia, critical to ending the war, to bringing Putin to the negotiating table. What are the conversations around that at this point?
Well, it is actually interesting, Kristen. Just earlier today, there was reporting in another outlet that discussed the possibility that the U.S. May have given a green light for the Ukrainians to use a different type of long-range missile, not the Tomahawks. But the president very publicly, just this afternoon, refuting that report on social media, wanting to make it very clear that essentially the United States did not authorize any use of long-range missile inside Russia. So it still is, it appears, based on that post from President Trump, that he does not want to make it seem as if the U.S. is actively urging Ukraine to move ahead with these long-range missile attacks. And indeed, you heard the president refuse to provide those Tomahawk missiles to Zelensky late last week, as you spoke with the Ukrainian president over the weekend, Kristen.
Gabe, thank you so much. And we are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There's more news ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.